A black woman stands at the entrance of a high-end boutique in Midtown Atlanta, wearing a tailored navy blazer and calm eyes. The store associate, a young white woman with a clipboard and clipped tone, blocks her path with a fake smile. "We're closed for cleaning," she says, just before letting two white women walk in behind her. Laughter echoes from inside the glass doors. One employee pretends to make a call to security, holding up his phone like a threat. Pedestrians slow down to watch. A few shake their heads, most just keep walking. She doesn't argue, she doesn't speak. She steps back, takes a seat across the street and waits, still silent, unmoved. What no one inside the store knows is that she isn't here to shop. She's here to finalize the purchase of the building they're standing in. The very boutique that shut her out will soon be hers, from the floorboards to the rooftop sign. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. She was born in Atlanta, not far from the street where they once laughed at her. Her name didn't appear in magazines. Her face wasn't familiar to the public, but she was known in the quiet places, behind closed boardrooms, inside city records, among developers who whispered her name with a mix of respect and wariness. Her mother had cleaned floors in this same district when the sidewalks were cracked and no one wanted to invest. Every evening, her mother's hands came home red and raw from chemicals, but she never complained. She just said, "Own something, baby. Don't just visit, own it." The girl listened. She studied. While others sought attention, she stayed in the background, learning property law and finance by heart. She built quietly. Duplexes turned into fourplexes, then into apartment buildings, then full commercial lots. No one noticed because she didn't want them to. She never wore labels. She never posted her wins. She let her work speak, and it did louder every year. By 45, she owned 23 properties across the Southeast. But this block, this corner of Midtown, was different. It was personal. She watched it change. The old diner became an artisanal biscuit shop. The dollar store turned into a handmade jewelry boutique. The community center where she once read books on weekends was torn down and replaced by a minimalist coffee bar that didn't accept cash. Prices went up. Brown faces disappeared. History was painted over with pastel logos and vague slogans. So she started planning. Quietly, over years, buying up parcels through holding companies, letting landlords reach out to her, not the other way around. She didn't rush, she didn't announce. She waited for the block to turn over. Now the time had come. The last piece, the luxury boutique at the corner, was ready for transfer. All that remained was the final inspection. She was already the majority owner of the building. The lease on the boutique was nearly up, and she had no intention of renewing it. She planned to replace it with something different, something better, something that belonged to the community again. That morning, she woke up early, ironed her blazer, reviewed the documents. Everything was in place. She walked through the block one last time, not as a visitor, but as an owner preparing to claim what she had already earned. She didn't expect applause. She didn't need recognition. But she did expect professionalism. What she got instead was a smirk. A gatekeeper who didn't know the gates had already been bought and paid for. The luxury boutique stood in front of her like a mirror to everything she had risen above. Dismissal, assumption, exclusion. But she wasn't shaken. She had seen worse, much worse, and she had learned that nothing rattles power like silence. Nothing shifts perception like restraint. So when the young clerk stepped in front of the door and blocked her path, she didn't argue. She just took a seat across the street and waited. Because when you own the building, you don't have to knock. The sidewalk buzzed with weekend shoppers, iced coffees in hand, laughing at small dogs in designer bags. It was the kind of block where style tried hard to look effortless. Linen shirts, imported shoes, quiet watches. The air smelled of eucalyptus oil and expensive pastry. It was curated, modern, and meticulously white. She moved through it like a shadow they didn't want to see. Past the artisan bakery where the cashier didn't meet her eyes. Past the plant shop where no one offered to help. past the record store that used to sell gospel and Marvin Gaye, now blasting obscure vinyl from Iceland. People glanced, then looked away. She wasn't loud, but she didn't fit the mood board. When she reached the boutique, it happened in a blink. The door clicked open just as she touched the handle, and a young associate stepped out, clipboard clutched like a shield. "Hi," she said, voice bright but flat. "We're actually closed for a private fitting." Behind her, 2 white women stepped past and entered. No hesitation, no questions. "Oh my God, I love this line," one of them said, laughing as she disappeared inside. The associate didn't flinch. The woman outside tilted her head slightly but said nothing. No raised eyebrow, no shift in posture. The associate smiled, tighter now. "You can check back tomorrow if you'd like. We're just not open to the public today." The door shut behind her, locked with a soft click. Inside, another employee, a young man with bleached hair and expensive glasses, peeked out from behind the counter. He whispered something to the associate, then raised his phone and mimed a call, mouthing security through the glass. She stood there for a moment longer, then turned. She walked across the street to a wooden bench tucked beneath a flowering tree and sat, one ankle crossed over the other, hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't pull out her phone. She didn't make a scene. She just waited. A couple pushing a stroller paused nearby, sensing something off. A teenage boy on a skateboard slowed down, eyes moving from the boutique to the woman on the bench. A street musician adjusted the strap of his guitar and played a softer chord. The mood shifted, subtle but present. Not outrage, not solidarity, just discomfort. Inside the boutique, the associate laughed again. She leaned toward the counter and said something to her coworker. He looked through the window right at the woman and smirked. The woman didn't move. She thought about other benches she'd sat on. One in a bank lobby where no one came to help her until she showed a cashier's check with 7 zeros. Another in a hotel lounge where security asked her to prove she was a guest, until she presented the deed to the building next door. Even in the corporate office of a major tech firm, where she'd waited calmly as 2 junior employees tried to direct her to the temp agency entrance. It always played out the same. A test of dignity, a dare to react. And she never gave them what they wanted. Instead, she gave them silence. The kind that made people uncomfortable. The kind that made them wonder later if they had just made a very expensive mistake. Cars passed. People stared. The boutique doors stayed shut. Inside, someone pulled the blinds halfway down. A message. "Stay out." She sat perfectly still. She wasn't here to shop. She wasn't here to protest. She was here to complete a transaction. And the difference between a customer and an owner is that the customer needs permission. The owner does not. Still, they treated her like a stranger, like a threat, like a problem. They assumed what they saw was all there was to see, and that assumption, so small, so casual, so routine, was about to cost them everything. Because the lease on this boutique expired in 2 months. Because the building itself had already changed hands, and because in just a few minutes, someone would walk up this very sidewalk, clipboard in hand, and say her name out loud. And then the laughter. Inside would stop. She didn't check her watch. She didn't need to. She knew the rhythm of business deals better than anyone inside that boutique. She could feel when the final signature was being notarized, when the wire transfer was confirmed, when the moment arrived, not just legally, but symbolically. It had been nearly 30 minutes since they turned her away. The door to the building next to the boutique opened, and a young man in a pressed shirt stepped out, clipboard in hand, nervous but focused. He scanned the sidewalk, then walked directly toward the woman on the bench. "Excuse me," he said, voice loud enough for the boutique staff to hear through the glass. "Are you Miss Franklin?" She rose, slow and steady. "Yes. I'm here to walk you through the final inspection for Suite A, the fashion retailer." He said it clearly, audibly, on purpose. It was protocol, but it was also punctuation. Behind the glass door, the young associate froze. The clipboard confirmed what they hadn't seen. The woman they blocked from entering, the one they smirked at, dismissed, and pretended to call security on, was not a customer. She was the new owner. The associate unlocked the door with trembling fingers. The latch stuttered before clicking. Horny, she stepped aside like a child caught in a lie, unsure whether to speak or disappear. The woman entered quietly. Inside, the boutique smelled of cedarwood and linen. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Racks of silk blouses lined the walls, untouched. The other employees stood stiffly by the register, eyes fixed on the floor. No one said a word. She walked past them and set her leather folder on the marble counter, pulled out documents, pages with watermarks and signatures, blueprints of the suite, lease expiration dates, notes on zoning permits and renovation timelines. The junior property manager followed, answering her questions about plumbing, electrical updates, and square footage with crisp precision. They spoke the language of owners, the language of power. The associate hovered near the fitting rooms, her face pale now, voice gone. She watched the woman sign off on final specs. She watched her gently tap the counter where the display of sunglasses stood, marking it for removal. She heard her say, "This wall will be opened up, the gallery needs more light." And then it landed. They weren't staying. There would be no next season, no spring collection, no new inventory. The boutique's lease would not be renewed, and it wasn't because of a complaint. It was because the woman they excluded had been preparing this moment for years. She didn't yell. She didn't shame them. She didn't fire anyone on the spot. She simply walked through her new space, calm, composed, complete, and began imagining what would come next. She had once been a girl watching her mother scrub these streets clean. Now she owned the marble beneath her heels, and the silence in the store, once filled with smug laughter, had turned into something else entirely. Reckoning. By the time the regional manager arrived, the store was quiet as a chapel. She rushed in, breathless, face flushed, trying to hold a professional smile over panic. Her heels clicked too loudly on the tile as she approached. "Miss Franklin," she said, extending a hand that trembled at the edges. "We're so sorry about the misunderstanding earlier. There's no excuse for how you were treated. Seize." Franklin looked at the hand for a moment, then shook it, calmly. No warmth, no resentment, just formality. The associate who had blocked the door lingered by the fitting rooms, half hiding. Her polished confidence dissolved into something small. She was still trying to understand what had happened, how the world had shifted under her so completely. Moments ago, she thought she was guarding the door. Now she realized she had been guarding it against its owner. "I wasn't here for an apology," Ms. Franklin said evenly, eyes still scanning the floor plan, not the people. "I was here to complete the transition." The regional manager nodded too quickly. "Yes, of course, of course. We'd love the opportunity to continue our lease if possible. Maybe under revised terms?" Ms. Franklin turned a page. "You've got 60 days. That was the original agreement." A pause. "And then this space will be repurposed." The manager opened her mouth, but no words came. She looked at the associate, then at the man behind the counter. Both were rigid, bracing, for fallout, but it never came. Miss Franklin didn't punish, she didn't shame. That would have been too easy. Instead, she made it clear, with silence and certainty, that this wasn't about revenge. It was about vision. She reached into her folder and pulled out a second set of plans. These ones were full color, renderings of bright open rooms filled with paintings, photographs, and sculptures by Black artists from around the South. A community gallery, events for local schools, business development workshops in the back office, art that reflected the people who had once walked this block without being seen. She laid the rendering on the counter without comment. The boutique. Employees stared at it, confused then humbled. This wasn't a power play, it was a restoration. The customers who had entered earlier without resistance were now standing quietly by the window, unsure whether to leave or say something. One woman glanced at the floor, cheeks flushed, pretending to examine a necklace. The other simply slipped out the door. The sidewalk outside had changed too. People who had witnessed the beginning now lingered with questions in their eyes. Some had returned. Others had stayed the whole time, sensing something was happening worth staying for. One older man, who had grown up in that neighborhood before the boutiques arrived, removed his cap and nodded once through the glass. Ms. Franklin saw him. She nodded back. She didn't need attention. She needed space, and now she had it. This block, once marked by exclusion, would become something else entirely. Not with noise, but with ownership. Not with protest, but with presence. Have you ever been judged for how you look or where you're from? Share your story in the comments. We read every single one. It started with a single photo. Someone had taken it from across the street. A quiet snapshot of Ms. Franklin standing outside the boutique, calmly seated on the bench while the associate locked the door in her face. It captured the moment just before everything turned. The posture, the poise, the refusal to be moved. Then came the second photo. Taken not 20 minutes later, it showed the same woman inside the boutique, standing at the counter, papers spread before her. In the background, the same associate now stood still and uncertain, watching the transaction she had once assumed didn't involve the woman she had excluded. Side by side, the images went viral. The caption was simple. They wouldn't let her in the store, so she bought the building. In less than 24 hours, the post had been shared by thousands. Business journals picked it up. Local reporters reached out for quotes. National outlets followed, spinning the story into headlines that stirred emotion and discomfort in equal measure. Boutique owner denied entry to her own building. Black investor reclaims gentrified block with silent power move. Quiet justice. The woman who let dignity speak louder than rage. The boutique's corporate office scrambled. They issued a statement expressing deep regret over the behavior of their staff and vowed to undergo immediate diversity retraining. But no statement could erase the image of the door being shut. The video footage from the store's security cam, leaked days later, only confirmed what everyone had already seen with their hearts. A petition called for the company to be removed from the block entirely. Another more powerful movement began to swell beneath the surface, a surge of support for Black women in real estate, business ownership, and community redevelopment. Ms. Franklin did not give interviews. She released no statements. She declined every request to appear on camera, but her impact moved louder than any spotlight. Her gallery fund, something she had already been building behind the scenes, received a wave of donations. She launched a quiet initiative, Reclaim the Block, a grant program aimed at helping women of color purchase and revitalize commercial property in neighborhoods where their families had once been pushed out. Within 3 months, 6 new spaces had been acquired under the initiative's umbrella, not just in Atlanta, but in Birmingham, Charlotte, Jackson, and New Orleans. She didn't just transform the boutique, she transformed the blueprint. The boutique itself, once smug in its branding and exclusivity, saw a steep drop in foot traffic. Customers, even those who had once walked in without hesitation, now crossed the street or kept their heads down. Reviews plummeted. Employees resigned quietly, one after another. By the time the 60-day lease expired, the store was empty, and no one seemed to miss it. Construction on the gallery began the following week. The windows, once frosted to keep outsiders out, were replaced with clear glass that let sunlight flood in. The old logo came down without ceremony. A new sign was installed. Simple lettering, bold and open. The Franklin Collective. No need to explain it. People already understood, and those who didn't weren't the audience. As the weeks passed, new businesses approached her, asking how they could contribute. A coffee shop offered to host job training programs. The bakery that once ignored her sent over free food for the construction crew. Change had arrived, not through confrontation, but through consequence. She had said nothing cruel. She had pointed no fingers. She had made no demands. But everything shifted anyway, because she hadn't just purchased property. She had reclaimed presence. The boutique's old awning came down on a Thursday. No cameras, no press. Just a quiet crew with steady hands, peeling away the last layer of what once stood for exclusion. Behind it, the new face of the building revealed itself, clean, grounded, and honest. The block had begun to breathe differently. It started with how people walked. Slower, straighter, with less fear of being questioned, redirected, or ignored. Children from the nearby elementary school, mostly black and brown, were now seen wandering the sidewalk with clipboards, sketching what they saw. They were working on a class project. Our new community. They had been invited to the gallery. Before it even opened, Ms. Franklin walked the space the morning of the ribbon cutting, not in heels this time, but in flats that didn't echo when she moved. She paused before a wall where a large painting now hung, a portrait of her mother, not photorealistic, but emotional, all broad brushstrokes and warmth. It had been painted by a young woman from the neighborhood, one of the first recipients of the gallery's grant fund. Sunlight poured in through the open windows, the same light that had once been shut out by frosted glass. The first exhibit was titled, Still Here. It featured works from Southern Black artists, visual stories of endurance, migration, loss, and reclamation. The gallery filled with quiet footsteps and the soft hum of reflection. Some people wept. Others stood still, hands over mouths, remembering their own grandparents' houses before they were torn down for condos. She didn't stand at the front. She didn't speak to the crowd. She stood near the back, beside a father holding his daughter in his arms. The little girl pointed at a canvas filled with red clay and gold thread. "It looks like my Nana's garden," she whispered. The father nodded, eyes wet. Ms. Franklin didn't interrupt. She just smiled softly and walked on. The boutique's old staff had long scattered. The associate who once blocked her at the door was now working at a strip mall location across town. Her name wasn't mentioned. She was no longer the story. The story was what stood in her place. Block that once reflected only money, now reflected memory. A street that once served only a select few now opened its doors to all. The Franklin Collective became more than a gallery. It became a space for storytelling, healing, and education. On Saturdays, retired elders gave oral history sessions. On Wednesdays, local students attended workshops in art, finance, and real estate. A single corner unit had become a hub, a source of light in a city too often cast in shadow. And through it all, Ms. Franklin remained the same. Still quiet. Still private. Still walking the block like she always had. She never reminded people who she was. She never repeated what had happened at the boutique. She didn't have to. The community remembered for her. A mural appeared one morning on the wall across from the gallery, painted without her permission but never removed. It showed a woman sitting on a bench under a tree, legs crossed, waiting. Behind her stood a building wrapped in gold light. The words beside it read, She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. A little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve as they passed the corner where the boutique used to be. She pointed at the gallery's wide windows, filled with color and light. Inside, people moved slowly between canvases, some with notebooks, others just watching. "Who owns this place?" the girl asked. Her mother smiled, not breaking stride. A woman who knew what to do when the world told her she didn't belong. They kept walking, past the benches, past the tree that still bloomed soft pinks in the spring, past the plaque that now sat quietly near the door of the gallery, reading, "Reclaimed with grace, rededicated to the people." Miss Franklin didn't stand behind the desk or pose for pictures. She was inside, meeting with a young sculptor who had just moved back from New York, helping her apply for her first property loan. It was never about attention. It was always about access. One block changed, then another, then a few more. Not because of speeches, but because someone decided to stay seated on a bench long enough to remind the city, power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. Then it builds. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe in quiet strength and lasting change, share this story. Let someone else see what dignity can do. We're not done yet.